I want you to try something with me. Close your eyes for a moment. Now imagine you are perfectly, absolutely flat. Not thin, flat. You have width, you have length, but you have no height whatsoever. You live in a world drawn on an infinite sheet of paper, and you have never, not once in your entire existence, experienced up or down. These words mean nothing to you. They don't exist in your vocabulary or your thought. You are a creature of flatland. This may seem like a strange place to begin a journey into the fourth dimension, but bear with me. What I'm about to show you is that we, you and I, are in exactly the same position as these imaginary flat beings. We are prisoners of our dimensions, unable to perceive what lies perpendicular to our entire reality. But unlike the Flatlanders, we have something extraordinary. We have mathematics, we have imagination, and we have the ability to think our way into places we can never go. Let me introduce you to someone. His name is Square. He lives in Flatland, this two-dimensional universe, and he goes about his two-dimensional business. He can move left and right. He can move forward and backward. But up and down, these directions that are so natural to us, are utterly outside his experience. They are not just unknown to him. They are unknowable. His brain, if we can call it that, is not wired to process such concepts. When you tell a Flatlander about up, it's not that he doesn't believe you. It's that the words themselves have no meaning. It would be like me telling you to move in the direction of purple or to walk through happy. The instruction itself is nonsense. Now, Square has a house in Flatland. It's a simple square house naturally, with 4 walls. To him, this house is perfectly secure. He can close the door, and he is alone, private, safe. Nothing can reach him unless it enters through the door. This is obvious to him. This is certain. But imagine, if you will, that hovering above Flatland, there exists a 3-dimensional being. Let's make this creature something familiar. An apple. This apple can see all of Flatland spread out beneath it, the way you might look at a drawing on a table. And the apple sees Square enter his house and close the door. The apple, feeling friendly, decides to say hello. "Hello," says the apple, its voice somehow reaching into Flatland. "How are you? I am a visitor from the 3rd dimension." Square, inside his closed house, hears this voice, but he sees no one. He checks the door. It's locked. He checks the walls. They're solid. Yet the voice came from inside the room. More than that, the voice seemed to come from inside him, from his very center. The poor Square begins to worry about his sanity. Is he hearing things? Has the stress of two-dimensional life finally gotten to him? The apple, somewhat hurt at being dismissed as a hallucination, decides to make its presence known more dramatically. It descends into Flatland. But here's what Square sees. The apple, being 3-dimensional, can only exist in Flatland as a cross-section, a slice. As it descends, what appears in Square's closed room is, at first, a single point. Then, as more of the apple enters the plane of Flatland, the point becomes a tiny circle. The circle grows larger, larger still. It changes color slightly as it passes through different parts of the apple. Seeds appear and disappear within the circle. And Square watches all of this happening inside his locked room. What would you conclude if you were Square? Objects don't just appear from nowhere. They don't grow and shrink and change shape for no reason. They certainly don't manifest inside locked rooms. Square would be forced to conclude that either the laws of nature have stopped working or he has lost his mind. These would be the only rational explanations available to him. The apple, frustrated, decides on one more demonstration. It reaches into Flatland from below and lifts Square up, pushes him, if you will, out of the only reality he has ever known. And for the first time in his life, Square experiences up. At first, he's terrified, confused, disoriented. But slowly, very slowly, his perception adjusts. He begins to see Flatland from a perspective no Flatlander has ever seen. He looks down, and he can see inside closed houses. He can see the insides of his fellow Flatlanders, their internal organs, their thoughts made visible in the patterns of their construction. He has been given, as an incidental benefit of this dimensional transcendence, a kind of X-ray vision, not because he has gained a new power, but because he has gained a new perspective. Eventually, Square descends back to flatland. His friends rush over to him. From their perspective, he has simply appeared out of nowhere, not walked from somewhere else, just suddenly existed where he did not exist before. They ask him what happened, where he went, and Square tries to explain. "I was up," he says. "Up?" they ask. "What is up? Show us up. Point to it." And Square cannot, because up is not a direction in flatland. You cannot point to it using flatland coordinates. The dimension is perpendicular to everything they know. This is our situation, precisely our situation. We are three-dimensional creatures living in what appears to be a three-dimensional space. We can move left and right, forward and backward, up and down. These are the directions available to us. These are the dimensions we know. But what if there is another dimension, as real as these three, that lies perpendicular to all of them? Not left, not right, not up, not down, not forward, not backward, but in some other direction entirely. A direction we cannot point to, a direction we cannot visualize, a direction that, to us, is what up was to Square. Let me show you how we can think about this using something simple. A line segment. Take a line segment 1 inch long. This is a one-dimensional object. It has only length. Now, move this line segment perpendicular to itself, 1 inch to the side, and you generate a square, 1 inch by 1 inch. This square is two-dimensional. It has length and width. Now take that square and move it perpendicular to itself, 1 inch up, and you generate a cube, 1 inch by 1 inch by 1 inch. This cube is three-dimensional. It has length, width, and height. Now comes the question. What happens if we take this cube and move it perpendicular to itself, 1 inch in a direction perpendicular to length, width, and height? Not up, not sideways, not forward, but in some fourth direction. What we generate is a four-dimensional hypercube, a tesseract. I cannot show you a tesseract. I cannot build one for you. We are trapped in 3 dimensions the way Square was trapped in 2. But I can show you something almost as good. I can show you the shadow of a tesseract. When you cast a shadow of a 3-dimensional cube onto a 2-dimensional surface, you see something specific. You see 2 squares, one inside the other, with lines connecting their corners. This is the classic way we draw cubes. But notice something. In the shadow, not all the lines are equal. Not all the angles are right angles. The 3-dimensional perfection of the cube is lost in the 2-dimensional projection. This is the price of losing a dimension. Now, if we project a 4-dimensional tesseract into 3 dimensions, we see 2 cubes, one nested inside the other, with lines connecting their corners. This is what I can show you. This is what you can hold in your hand, if it were a model. But understand, this is not the tesseract itself. It is merely its shadow. In true 4-dimensional space, all the edges of a tesseract are equal length. All the angles are right angles. But we cannot see this. We can only see the distorted, compressed shadow of it in our 3-dimensional space. Think about what this means. Imagine you are a flatlander looking at the shadow of a cube. You would see this strange shape with unequal lines and weird angles, and someone would try to tell you that in 3 dimensions, this shape is perfectly symmetrical, perfectly regular. You might believe them mathematically, but you could never truly see it, never experience it. This is our situation with the tesseract, but here is where it gets profound. We can think about 4 dimensions. We can calculate in 4 dimensions. We can manipulate 4-dimensional objects mathematically with the same ease that we manipulate 3-dimensional objects physically. Mathematics is our dimensional liberator. It's the language that allows us to step outside our perceptual prison. When Einstein developed his theory of relativity, he was forced to think in 4 dimensions. Not 3 dimensions of space and time kept separate, but 4 dimensions woven together into space-time. In his universe, time is not something that flows while space sits still. Time is a dimension as real and as geometric as length, width, and height. You exist not as a 3-dimensional object moving through time, but as a 4-dimensional object, a kind of space-time worm, stretched between your birth and your death. At this very moment, all of you exists in 4 dimensions. Your childhood self and your elderly self, if you live that long, are as real in space-time as your current self. They are simply located at different coordinates along the time dimension. This is not poetry. This is physics. When we map the universe using Einstein's equations, we must use 4 coordinates to locate any event, 3 to specify where in space, and 1 to specify when in time. These 4 numbers are required, not optional, not convenient. Required. Space and time are not separate things. They are aspects of a single 4-dimensional structure. And here is something even stranger. Just as a flatlander cannot visualize up, we cannot visualize the time dimension properly. We experience it only as a forward flow, a river carrying us from past to future. But this is analogous to a flatlander who can only move in one direction, always forward, never backward. He would experience his dimension as a kind of flow too. He would think forward is fundamentally different from backward. But from a higher dimension, we can see that forward and backward are just 2 directions in the same dimension. Similarly, from a 5th-dimensional perspective, if such a thing exists, past and future might be just 2 directions in the time dimension, both equally accessible, both equally real. Now you might ask, if these dimensions are real, why can't we move in them? Why can't we step into the 4th dimension the way I can step up from the floor? There are several possible answers to this. One is that we do move in the 4th dimension. We are moving through time right now at a rate of 1 second per second, but we can only move in one direction. We are like flatlanders who are somehow constrained to always move forward, never backward or sideways. The dimension exists, but we are not free to explore it. Another possibility, and this is far more speculative, is that the extra dimensions are there, but they are curled up, compactified into spaces so small that we cannot perceive them. Imagine you are walking on a tightrope. From far away, the rope looks one-dimensional, just a line. But if you were an ant walking on that rope, you would discover that the rope has thickness. It's actually 3-dimensional. There's forward and backward along the length of the rope, but also around the circumference of the rope. This circular dimension is hidden from distant observers because it's so small. Some theories in physics suggest that our universe might have additional dimensions, perhaps 6 or 7 more, but they are curled up into circles or spheres so tiny that even our most powerful microscopes cannot detect them. At the scale of atoms, these dimensions might be accessible. But at our scale, they are invisible. There is something both humbling and exhilarating about this. We are dimensional creatures limited by the shape of our brains and the structure of our senses. But we are also mathematical creatures able to transcend those limitations through thought. A flatlander could never see a cube, but he could understand one. He could work with it, manipulate it, predict its behavior. We are in the same position with higher dimensions. We will never see a tesseract. Not really, not the way we see a cube, but we can understand it, we can explore it, we can even, in a sense, touch it through mathematics. And this brings me to something I find almost mystical. The universe is under no obligation to make sense to us. It was not constructed for our convenience or our comprehension. The fact that we can understand anything at all about the deep structure of reality is a kind of miracle. That we, a collection of atoms that somehow learn to think, can sit here and deduce the geometry of space-time, can imagine dimensions we cannot see, can construct in our minds shapes that cannot exist in our physical space, this is extraordinary. We are a way for the universe to know itself, yes. But more than that, we are a way for the universe to exceed itself, to imagine beyond its own dimensions. Consider the flatlander again for a moment. When Square returned from his journey into the 3rd dimension, he tried to tell his friends what he had seen. They didn't believe him. They couldn't believe him. It was too far outside their experience. But some of them, the mathematicians perhaps, might have listened. They might have said, "Show us the mathematics of this 3rd dimension. Prove to us that it could exist." And Square could have done so. He could have shown them how a sphere appears as an expanding and contracting circle as it passes through flatland. He could have derived the geometry of three-dimensional space using only two-dimensional logic. This is what we do with the fourth dimension. We cannot see it, but we can prove it must exist. We can show how four-dimensional objects would behave if they intersected our three-dimensional space. We can predict, calculate, verify. And in doing so, we open a door. Not a physical door, but a conceptual one. We step outside the cave of our immediate perception and see the shadows for what they are, mere projections of a richer, stranger, more complex reality. The ancient Greek philosopher Plato told a story about prisoners in a cave who had been chained there since childhood, facing a wall. Behind them, a fire burned, and between them and the fire, people carried objects that cast shadows on the wall. The prisoners, seeing only shadows, believed the shadows were reality itself. They gave names to the shadows. They developed theories about shadow behavior. Their entire epistemology, their entire understanding of existence, was based on shadows. Then, one prisoner escaped. He turned around, saw the fire, saw the real objects, and finally left the cave and saw the sun. When he returned to tell the others, they thought he was mad. His stories of a bright world beyond the wall made no sense to them. We are those prisoners. The three-dimensional world we perceive is our cave wall. The fourth dimension, and perhaps others beyond it, are the fire and the sun. We cannot turn around and see them directly, but we can deduce their existence from the patterns we observe, the shadows cast into our dimensional space. And here is what moves me most about all of this. Every one of us, in our daily lives, is a three-dimensional being. We move through space, we occupy volume, we cast shadows. But in our minds we can be more, we can transcend, we can build cathedrals of thought that extend into dimensions we will never physically visit. We can hold in our imagination shapes that cannot exist in any space we will ever walk through. This is not a small thing. This is, in its way, the most human of all activities. We are not content with what is. We insist on imagining what could be, what must be, if the mathematics is right. There is an old notion that what we cannot see does not exist, that what we cannot touch is not real. But we have learned slowly and sometimes painfully that the universe is far larger and stranger than our senses reveal. We cannot see atoms, yet they are real. We cannot see the curvature of space-time, yet it bends light around stars. We cannot see the fourth dimension, yet its mathematics describes the universe more accurately than any three-dimensional model ever could. So when I ask you to imagine a four-dimensional space, I am not asking you to visualize it the way you visualize a cube or a sphere. I am asking you to think it, to follow the mathematics where it leads, even when it leads beyond the boundaries of possible experience. This is the essence of scientific imagination, not fantasy, not mere speculation, but rigorous extension of logic into realms we cannot visit. And who knows? Perhaps somewhere, in some corner of reality we have not yet explored, there are four-dimensional beings looking at us the way we look at flatlanders. Perhaps they see our entire lives, past and future, spread out before them. Perhaps they watch us struggle with the concept of space-time the way we might watch Square struggle with the concept of up. Perhaps they wonder if we will ever figure it out, ever build the mathematics that would allow us to truly understand the shape of the cosmos. Perhaps right now, one of them is trying to say hello, and we, trapped in our three-dimensional cave, hear only noise. This is not a comfortable thought, but it is, in its way, a wonderful one, because it means there is more, always more. More dimensions, more complexity, more strangeness than we have yet imagined. And we, with our limited senses and our unlimited curiosity, we get to explore it, not with our bodies perhaps, but with our minds, with our equations, with that extraordinary gift of human consciousness that allows us to step outside ourselves and see the universe not as it appears, but as it is. So the next time you hold a cube in your hand, rotating it, watching the light play across its faces, remember this: you are not seeing the cube as it truly is. You are seeing a three-dimensional projection of a cube, but the mathematics of that cube exists in a space far more vast than 3 dimensions. It exists in the space of pure geometry, where dimensions are not limited by the accidents of our evolution or the constraints of our perception. And in that space, we are finally free. Free to imagine, free to explore, free to transcend the dimensional prison that houses our bodies, if not our minds. This is the gift of the 4th dimension. Not that we can see it, but that we can think it. And in thinking it, we become for a moment something more than 3-dimensional creatures. We become mathematicians, philosophers, explorers of the impossible. And that, to me, is cause for wonder.